Thanks so much to Clotilde Yap for doing this presentation for us. She did it once before last year. Was a really great presentation. We were unable to record it at that time, so thanks so much, Clotilde, for agreeing to let us record it this time. So Clotilde is she manages the My China Roots global collections, working with partners to preserve historical collections of Chinese communities around the world. She's been working for My China Roots since 2017, and she's based in London, UK, and has roots in France, Malaysia, and Fujian province. I hope I said that correctly. And she is in London right now, I believe. I'm not sure how many hours that is ahead of us. Eight hours?
That's right.
Oh, okay.
Uh, I think it's 7 hours, so it's
Oh,
just
seven.
past 9 p.m.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Clotilde. I'll hand the microphone off to you.
Thank you, Brian. I'm delighted to be here. It's always really interesting to speak to patrons at the San Francisco Public Library and meet with people who are actually using our resource. So I'm really delighted to be here. Um, so, like Brian said, my name is Clotilde. I figured that as a way of introducing myself, I could answer the same question that was asked to everyone in the chat. So, in case you missed it, Brian posted a question at the beginning, which was, "What brings you here today?" You can answer this as you wish. You can take it as philosophical as you like. Um, I just happened to be chatting with someone earlier today who asked me how I got into genealogy. And really, I have a different answer every time I get asked that question. And sometimes it takes a really long time to answer that question. Sometimes it takes just 30 seconds. But the short story is I was born in London, but my father is Chinese Malaysian. And, um, growing up with a Chinese Malaysian father and my mother being French in an English setting exposed me to a lot of different cultures, including Chinese culture, but without me ever feeling a part of that. And so since I was a child, I've been on this journey of trying to reconnect with the different cultures that I'm a part of. So I went to Chinese school willingly. I was not forced by my parents. Um, and then even as an adult, traveled to China, studied Chinese. And in the beginning, I think it was in a bid to connect with myself that I did family history research. But now when I do it today, it feels like more of an exercise in trying to connect with my family members around me. So especially like my Chinese Malaysian grandma who lives in Malaysia and who I see every year. Every time I go back now, I feel like I get a little bit closer to her because I ask her questions about her childhood or about our other family members. And even though it's not always comfortable, I think we both benefit from it. So during this journey of doing my own family history research, I happened to be studying abroad in Beijing. This was a long time ago now, but while I was a student, I thought, why don't I visit the village that my great grandfather comes from? So this village is in Fujian province. It's a small, sleepy fishing village, not too far from Quanzhou, which is a big port town. And it was a very interesting experience for me being mixed race, going back to this village and meeting people who were my long lost relatives. They were also Yaps. They all had the same name as me. Some of them remembered my grandfather and my great grandfather. And they really accepted me as if I was their own. And it was the first time that I felt like, oh wow, actually maybe I am Chinese. Who knows? And that experience led me to finding my China roots, who were already helping other folks from all over the world to reconnect with their heritage. Sometimes it was through roots trips, like what I did alone, but also with just more tangible research, because sometimes that interest in your roots manifests in, yeah, a desire to research and be productive. And um, there's something very addictive about that process, and that's where we try to support people. So to give you an overview of what I'll be talking about today. I'll tell you a little bit more about my China roots and who we are. Then I'll give you an overview of the database that is available via the San Francisco Public Library. I'll show you how you can access the database. And then at the end, I'll talk you through some typical scenarios that you or others might face as you're doing your Chinese family history research. And then I'll give you a demo on how to actually use the tools. Um, so if you do happen to have any questions about anything that is discussed, do just drop them in the chat and we'll do our best to get to them at the end of this talk. So as I mentioned, my China roots does various different things depending on what people are interested in. But primarily, these are the three key things that we specialize in. We have a special family tree software that is designed for Chinese families that allows you to add relatives, compile information that you have about your ancestors. And this is connected to our historical database of records. Now, the family tree is not available via the San Francisco Public Library. This is a separate service that is on our main website. Primarily, what I'll be talking about is the database today. Um, so this database of records includes several millions of names of Chinese immigrant ancestors. So people who left China to go to places like the US, Canada, and also a few other locations. And finally, the other thing that My China Roots does is research, so professional research for those who are stuck, for those who want to reach out to their relatives in China who don't know how to do that, or who need professional help with, for example, translation or outreach to their village. So I think Brian has a few links that he can post in the chat if you're interested in finding more about any of these things. Um, so in terms of the actual My China Roots database, what does it consist of? So we have two main buckets of records, so two separate databases, if you like, even though they are interconnected. We have a database of overseas records that consist of 5, almost 6 million historical records, and these are going to be diaspora records. So records of people who left China and settled elsewhere, such as the US, like I said, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia. And then we also have a separate bucket of records, which are Chinese family tree books, also known as jiapu or zupu. So these are fully in Chinese and they come from mainland China. We estimate about 200 million names in these. These books tend to be quite comprehensive. And they're also, jiapu is what we call the holy grail in Chinese genealogy, because if you find your jiapu, you find your entire Chinese lineage. So I'll be telling you more about these books and how you can find yours a bit later in the talk. Um, Now, in terms of who the database is for, of course, it's for people who have Chinese heritage. Um, but especially what we're focused on are people whose ancestors left between the 1850s and the 1950s, sometimes a bit later. And primarily the two ancestral provinces that we specialize in are Guangdong. So if you're Cantonese or Hoisan, then we'll have records for you. And we also specialize in Fujian province. So for people like me who have Southeast Asian heritage, um, their roots are going to be both from Guangdong and Fujian. And then in terms of the collections, we cover, of course, North America, a few countries in the Caribbean, and Southeast Asia. Although our platform is English speaking right now, we do hope to one day also have records from Latin America, and that this would also mean having tools that are accessible in Spanish, as well as in French, in Tagalog for the Filipino community, etc. So how do you access the My China Roots database from SFPL? So if you navigate to the articles and databases section, and then you filter by the letter M, you should be able to find My China Roots there. You can just click on the link there. Um, And then if you're accessing it from your house, you'll be prompted to enter your San Francisco Public Library credentials. So you need a library card, but then access will be completely free. The other thing you could do, of course, is just go to the library in person, either use one of their laptops or you can bring your own device. You can even be on your phone or on your own laptop at the library. And all you have to do is type in this URL, which is mychinarootslibrary.com. So long as you're on the library premises, you will immediately have access to everything. Now, if you're not at San Francisco, if you don't have a San Francisco library card, I've listed here a few of the other libraries who offer My China Roots for free. So in the Bay Area, you have Alameda County, Marin County Free, UC Berkeley, Stanford. Um, so do check those out as well. If you don't see your library and you would like your local library to subscribe, then please do get in touch with me. Um, I'll post my email in a little bit, but you can either email me or even better, if you email your library or if you happen to be there and just speak to your local reference librarian and tell them about My China Roots. Um, they always love to hear from the community. So if you have certain requests, it will probably be even better than if I contact them to ask them to subscribe to My China Roots. So that's how you access the resource. Okay, so now we're ready to get started. I took a an imaginary case study, but really a lot of the people who've been leaving comments in the chat have similar stories, perhaps. So let's imagine that we have this lady, Marian Fong, who's from the Bay Area, who can speak a little bit of Chinese but cannot read Chinese. She struggles to get information from her relatives about her ancestors. And she's also been struggling to find records. She's coming across different names and she's just not really sure who is who. Now, this is quite typical in Chinese genealogy. And I would say the two things that you need to start off with, it sounds really obvious, but you're going to need to collect names and places, names of people that you're interested in, and the places that they came from, as yeah, as detailed as you can. And when collecting names, it's important to try and keep track and record the different aliases that an ancestor might have. Um, just as it is recording the different places that they stated they may have been from. On one record, it may say Hong Kong. On the other, it might say Canton. So just keep track of these things because they don't necessarily contradict each other. In terms of the last issue that Marion is facing about her ancestor having many different names and possibly being a paper son, this difficulty in a way is connected to the second brick wall that she mentions, which is her relatives don't want to talk about the past. Now, maybe a lot of you have, experience with this, trying to speak to relatives, and they just don't want to talk about, what happened. And this is probably related to America's history with Chinese exclusion, which from a genealogical standpoint, did create a lot of materials and documentation so that we can track what happened to our ancestors who did manage to settle or try to settle in the US. But on the flip side, also created a lot of trauma, which could be handed down from one generation to the next. So it's important to keep these things in mind when you're starting this research, as you're navigating, asking questions to relatives. Um, so let's take a look at the database, taking Marion's case as an example. So she doesn't have too much information to start with, but let's see what she can do. Okay, so here we have the homepage for the My China Roots database. If I'm Marion and I want to start really broad and see what there is to offer on my Chan roots, I'm going to type in the name of an ancestor. Let's say a great grandparent called Git Fong. I don't know much about this ancestor. I know that they lived in San Francisco for a while. Uh, I know the name of their wife. She was called Lam Shi, but I don't know much else. Okay. He was probably born in the 1890s. Now, on this search page, I have a very general search form right here, which I'm going to use now. However, we do have a list of all the different record categories beneath it. So feel free to just browse from here. But I'm really searching wide, so I'll just start with a name and see what I can find. And maybe this will also inspire me to ask my relatives more questions. So I type in Git Fong and click search. Okay, which is a little bit slower than usual. My apologies. Um, okay, here we go. So I have about 70 results for Git Fong, and you can see here that um, there are a lot of variant names that are showing up in the results. That's because at my China roots, we know that there is a lot of variety in how Chinese ancestor names were transcribed, because depending on where they arrived, depending on what question they were asked, they may have given a different name. And also, if it was a white person transcribing their name, they may not have understood them speaking in Cantonese or in Hoisan. And so they would have used whatever letters they thought, um, sounded okay, which is why we have both Gitfong and Getfong in the results. Now, in the types of results that you would get, you'll see we have these different categories. And I always recommend starting with census records. So censuses were taken every 10 years or so in America, and they give you a good idea of a person's trajectory throughout their life because you'll see where they were living, you'll see who they were living with, you'll see their occupation, and all sorts of other information. Um, so let's look for a census record of my ancestor Git Fong, who I know was living in San Francisco, and I know he was born in the 1890s. So scrolling down, okay, I find one Git Fong, born in 1890 in China, and it states who he was living with on this record. So I see he was living with his wife Lam Shi, as well as a group of children. So let's say this matches, Marion's family. This matches the names that she has heard before. So the other things that I can learn from the census record is the birth date. Now, again, take birth dates with a pinch of salt. Depending on the record, it was very easy for people to state 1890, 1891, 1892. It doesn't mean that it's the different person necessarily if the birth date is not the same. Um, the other thing I can do if I want to is take a closer look at the image. So on any record that you find on My China Roots, you can click View in Original Record, which will expand the page and you can take a closer look. Sometimes not all the information was extracted. Uh, you can also see here, for example, let's see, where is Fonggit head? Here he is with his family. And his occupation is only stated as a laborer on a farm. But the other cool thing about this is it says under here, citizenship, year of immigration to the United States. So this is quite a helpful clue. Um, this tells me that Git Fong arrived in the US in 1908. So I'll just keep this in my mind for now and go back to my census record. Now, on any page where there is relative information, you can, of course, also click on any of these other individuals. Let's say I click on the daughter, Ethel, to see what kind of information is recorded about her. Maybe this is my grandmother, or Marion's grandmother. And on any page as well, you can scroll to the bottom and we try to suggest matches that may exist for each person that you find. So here I can click View 20 potential records matching Ethel Fong, which will search for other records on the database of Ethel. Sorry about the speed. I must be having slow network. Okay. Now, one of the ways in which My China Roots is quite unique and different from other genealogy platforms is that we focus on records of the Chinese community by the Chinese community. For example, we have a series of um, Chinese business and student directories, which were compiled for Chinese people in San Francisco and the Bay Area, for example. So here we have a record of Ethel. Not sure if it is the same Ethel. I would need to check the address and see if it matches my grandmother's address, if this is my grandmother. But the great thing about these directory records is that they are bilingual. And having Chinese characters on a record is very important if you're doing Chinese family history research because it allows you to identify more uniquely whether a record is matching yours or not. If you find two different records of whom you think is the same person, but the Chinese names don't match, then you know it's not definitely not the same person, even though they have the same English name. So whenever there's a Chinese name, we will try to extract it, as you can see in this entry, where we've transcribed Ethel's name. Now you'll see that on any uh, table where we've extracted all the data, you might see a surname hyperlinked if it's in Chinese, or even if it's not in Chinese. So if I click on this Fong, this will redirect you to My China Roots database of Chinese surnames. This is because surnames give you a lot of clues and information. If you don't have much to start with, understanding the history of your surname can give you a lot of information already. So here's the page for Fong. If I don't read or speak Chinese and I type in Fong in the database, then I can see that Fong, in fact, is not just one Chinese surname, but can be as many as six, seven, eight, gosh, a lot of different possible translations of Fong into Chinese. So the next question is, well, which one of these is my Chinese surname? So there are a few clues that you can use to figure it out. You can look at it. Perhaps you can recognize some Chinese. Perhaps you've seen your surname written in Chinese before. You can look at the meaning of it if you have been told what your surname means, or you could see you could look at which regions it is found in, or also which dialect. So let's say sorry, there's a final way of identifying your surname, and that is simply to ask someone who does know. So whether it's a parent or a grandparent or a relative who reads Chinese, you can ask them and they will be able to tell you which is which. So let's say in Marion's case, she knows that her phone means direction or square or something like this. Of course, she knows her family immigrated to the United States and that they speak mostly Cantonese. So she can narrow it down and maybe confirm with a relative that this one that looks like a running man um, is her surname. So if she clicks on it, explore Fang meaning and origins, she can discover more information about her surname, such as its legendary origins, also how many Fong family tree books are available on the database, what other Fong records are available aside from family tree books, where do Fongs come from ancestrally, according to My China Roots? So we've actually collected a lot of data points about ancestral places. And the ancestral place is one of the key clues to look out for if you're interested in knowing your ancient Chinese history. So where did your family come from before they immigrated? And when we say ancestral home, we don't mean just the general area or the province, but the exact village that your family comes from. And I'll talk more about this a little bit later. We have at the bottom of this page as well a breakdown of the different pronunciations of this same one surname, by dialect, and by region. So Fong, actually, there isn't too much variation. You can see that it's pronounced and spelled Fang, Fong, Fang, Pong, which all sort of sound the same. But in places like Indonesia, you see how much it changes in not just Indonesia, but other countries where there's been a lot of adaptation of names to sound more local, or places like Vietnam that use, different alphabets. So this is just, these pages are there to educate people about the flexibility that one should have when looking at names, not just surnames, but the first names also. Um, okay, so this was just a slight tangent to the surname database, but now I'm going to go back to my search for Gitfong. So I found one census record. It tells me when he was born. It shows me who his family members are, which is confirmed by my family. Now I'm going to go back with this newfound information. I'm going to just see if there are any more census records of a Git Fong in San Francisco, um, who's also born around that time. Now there's a Chow Git Fong. I've also heard, me being Marian, I've heard that my great grandfather also went by the name Chow Fong, not just Git Fong, but Chow Fong. So immediately, my curiosity is piqued, and it turns out this seems to be the same person. He has the same wife, he has the same children. Simply, this is taken 10 years later in a different census. So this just goes to show how you have to keep your eyes and mind open when doing this kind of research. So what else is on this page? What else does it tell me? Their address is a bit different. They're still in San Francisco. Um, so I know that they were definitely in San Francisco in, I think it was 1920, the one we saw before, and 1940. So aside from census records, what other records could you find through the database? I'm just going to go to birth, marriage, and death to see what is there. Birth, marriage, and death could be marriage records. It could also be cemetery records. And again, here we have an entry for a Cho Git Fong. The name spelled a little bit different again, Chou, but I know that this is the same person because his wife also matches. She's Lam Shi. The birth date almost matches. It's 1891, not 1890, which is pretty close. And if these people really were my great grandparents, I could look at the pictures and see if I recognize them. So if you are just starting out in your search, then I really recommend looking for a gravestone. We do have a certain number of Bay Area Chinese tombstones on the database, which you can check. If they're not there, do ask your family, see if there is a picture within your family of an ancestral gravestone you can use. And this is because Chinese tombstones have a lot of clues that you don't expect, especially if you don't read Chinese. If you look at this image, it looks like there's not much in English. You have names and you have dates. But in Chinese, there's a lot more there. So Chogit, for example, he has not one but two names that are listed on his gravestone. So why does he have two names? Qiu Jie and Gong Ping in Mandarin Chinese. Don't ask me for the Cantonese pronunciation. I don't know it. Um, well, Chogit we know, but not the other one, Gong Ping. So uh, it was traditional for Chinese men to have multiple aliases. They could have a courtesy name, they could have a generation name, they could have a married name. These, a friend of ours called them milestone names. You take a new name as you reach a new stage in your life. So depending on when the person was um, recorded on a census, for example, or when they arrived in the States, they may have used a slightly different name. So this is helpful also if you want to research more records of this person. You have an extra name to search with. The other cool thing about tombstones is they'll often tell you where in China the person was from. And they'll give you an exact location of a village. At least Chinese American tombstones often will. You'll see that the birthplace has been transcribed here. And if you click on it, it will open the corresponding page on the My China Roots ancestral village database. So this is another search engine that we have available. You can search it under resources. You see there's a surname page and there's a village page. So um, on this page, you can see where the village is in China, where its modern address is. You can see its upper hierarchies. This is important to know, the general area. So this particular village is in Zhongshan, which is one of the key ancestral provinces of a lot of Chinese Cantonese Americans. Um, Okay. And you can also see from this page that according to our own data, this is a famously Fong area. So a lot of Fongs do come from this village. So this is doubly confirmed. So going back to my search page, I'm going to keep looking at other records. I will come back to tombstones a little bit later, but for now, I found two census records. I found one tombstone of my great grandparents. So we're doing very well. But I want to learn more about their arrival and how they got here. So I'm going to keep looking for other records. Just under here, under birth, marriage, and death. Uh, Actually, I remember what I need to do. I'm just going to edit my search since I know that he used an alternative name later in life, which was Chow Git Fong, not just Git Fong. I want to narrow my search a little bit to make sure I see records that would be more relevant. You can see in this advanced search form that I can add a series of filters. So places that he may have lived, gender, birthplace, death place. I can also search with a family member if I want to. So I could enter Lum here, for example, but for now, I just want to show you the breadth of the database. So I won't add too many filters. Just click search. Okay. And this is what I found earlier on as well. So we have some collections that don't have any images because they're just indexes. I came across this earlier, which I think is probably of the same person. So this is a death record of a Chow Fong, not Git Fong this time, but Chow Fong, who was born in 1892, also 4th of July, same date, and died in 1965, same as the tombstone. It doesn't say that his middle name was Git, but there is the initial of G. So I'm pretty sure this is him as well, even though the date doesn't match. And this is helpful to know because it's possible that he would have recorded his date differently on another record as well. So I'm going to go back to um, my other search results. What else do I want to see? So we have a certain number of immigration and travel records on the database as well, including Chinese exclusion records. So when we talk about Chinese exclusion records, there are two main types of documents that you'll probably find on My China Roots. And these are immigration case files, as well as exclusion books. So what do we mean by a Chinese immigration or Chinese exclusion case file? So during the Chinese exclusion period, let me see. Yeah, during the Chinese exclusion period, as a lot of you know, um, mostly Chinese people were not allowed to enter the United States. There were a few exceptions, however, if the individual was a native born, if they were a merchant, if they were the wife of a merchant, if they were a student, they were allowed into the US. But even if they were legally settled in the US and they needed to leave the country to go on holiday or to go back to China to visit family, they still needed to provide a lot of paperwork to be able to come back in. So whenever they had to move or leave the country, they would need to send a lot of supporting documents to the authorities to make sure that they could be allowed back in. And whenever they wanted to bring a relative over, same thing. So this is what you can find in a case file. So these case files, let me just open one as an example. Most case files are going to come from the National Archives. In fact, that's a lie. All case files are originally going to be at the National Archives of the US. If you have ancestors who came in via San Francisco, most likely the case file will be at NARA San Bruno, so in South San Francisco. Now, you'll see from this page that there's no image available, but I can see a bit of basic information from the index, including case file number, the ship that the person arrived on, and the date that they arrived at San Francisco, as well as date of birth. Now, the reason that photos are not available is because some are privacy protected, and essentially the National Archives have not gotten around to scanning all of them yet because there are thousands, if not millions, of these immigration case files. However, you can click on this link, go to partner site, which will open the page on the National Archives website. So if you do find a case file that looks promising, that looks like one that would have belonged to your ancestor, I do recommend you apply for it. You could also go in person, but I think you can also email them and ask them to scan it for you. Okay. We do have some, if they have been scanned, they will be available on our website. So just to show you what those would look like. So here we have our collection of Chinese exclusion case files. Let me show you an example of one of these. The case files are really, really valuable. Some of them are 30, 50, 60 pages long. They can have different copies of certificates of identity inside them with photographs, with signatures. Some will have letters between, exchanged between lawyers or letters from immigration officials. There will also be transcripts sometimes of interviews between the individual or the applicant and or even transcripts of interviews with witnesses that were interviewed to testify, whether or not this was indeed the person that they claimed they were. So you can learn a lot of information, not just about one individual, but their entire family, even their family history back home. So I, again, highly recommend looking for Chinese immigration case files. The other exclusion record, which I mentioned, that is available is a Chinese exclusion book. So this, on the flip side to the case files, at the key ports of entry to the United States, the authorities wanted to keep track of the Chinese people that were entering and whether or not they were allowed to stay. So they kept separate records for Chinese people, separate from other ethnic groups, I mean. And these are the exclusion books, that's what we call exclusion books on the database, which essentially look like these big ledgers with names and names of Chinese people on them, with their status, and under which they claim to be allowed entry. With their residence, it will tell you which vessel, which ship they arrived on, and their date of arrival. And it will also tell you whether or not they were admitted. So on this page, I think everyone was admitted except these guys at the bottom who were denied entry. And sometimes you'll have a few notes also which relate to a case file perhaps, or why they were denied entry, like they were missing documentation or things like that. So this is helpful also for cross-referencing dates and case numbers. Okay, so we've looked at Chinese exclusion case files. Now, I don't know if you remember in the early census that we looked at, Chow Git-fong, yes, one of these, said that he'd arrived in the US in 1908. So what I would really like to find is some kind of record that tells me, that confirms his arrival in 1908 and whether I can learn anything else from it. So I'm going to filter. Okay, there's a field in the advanced filters called migration. So I'm going to type in year of arrival, year of migration, 1908, see what I can find. And I'm going to filter by immigration records. And down here, I have two interesting documents. One for Chow Hut Fong, which, in my opinion, sounds kind of like Chow Git Fong, Chow Hut, Chow Git. I'm not sure. But the reason it's interesting is because of the birth year of 1890. He departed Hong Kong in 1908, clearly stopped over in Honolulu, Hawaii, but this is the same person who's recorded further down as well as Chow Hut Fong. And the interesting thing about this one is that it's a Chinese passenger arrival list. So again, for a while, passenger arrivals were recorded separately from other passengers in some ship lists. His birth date here is 1891, and it states, according to the passenger list, his birthplace, which is a place called Hongshan in China. Now, again, we've done the work of trying to map it to the corresponding region in China. And Hongshan is actually an old word, an old historical name for Zhongshan, which is the same area that was on the tombstone. So again, this confirms that it is the same, that is, well, it's a pretty strong it would be a pretty big coincidence, I think, for it to be the same name or very similar sounding name, same birthplace and same birth date. Um, the other thing that is confirmed here is the name, which, if I were to compare it to the tombstone, would be identical. So I really recommend if you do come across a passenger list, no matter whether it's here or on any other platform, not everything is indexed or transcribed. And in fact, if you look at the passenger lists, even on my China routes, we haven't gotten round to extracting all the Chinese names on these because they're often hidden on the second page of a passenger list. So this is something we're working on adding because the Chinese names allow you to explore other records, other Chinese records. Um, which brings me to my final few minutes of my presentation, which is about the Chinese records. So uh, let me go back to my slides just for a second. So just to go take a few steps back again, this is really mostly relevant to those who want to learn about their ancestral origins back in China. As I mentioned earlier, knowing the village that you're from is really the key to finding um, any information about your family before they immigrated. And that's because in China, as opposed to other parts of the world, you cannot easily access civil records, birth certificates, death certificates, especially if your ancestors, left in the early 1900s. You just won't find that stuff. Birth certificates in China, they only became compulsory nationwide in the 1990s. So prior to that, you probably won't find a birth certificate. It depends on the family, but most likely not. So instead, the types of records that can be found are much more local. They are things like a family tree book that is kept and compiled by a family, or you might find an ancestral temple with transcriptions, honoring the ancestors, with the names of all the ancestors. Or you might find a family graveyard where all of your clan ancestors are buried. These are actually all of the types of things that My China Roots tries to look for when we're hired by a family to do this research. Now, traditionally, the way to finding these things involves a lot of cost. If you want to find your family tree book, which could contain thousands of names of your entire family history, you would have to go through so many steps. First, you would need to know the exact village that your family is from. Next, you would need to call up the village somehow, find a phone number. You would need to speak their language as well. You need to speak to them, confirm that they remember the names of your family, and then ask them if they still have a book, if they still have information. And they might say, yeah, we do. You should come over sometime and we can chat about it. But that means you need to get a flight ticket to Hoi-san or to Hong-san and travel there, maybe get a guide. It's a lot of cost and a lot of trust building involved as well. Now, we realized a long time ago at my China Roots that not everyone can afford to do this, and it is a lot of work. So, what we've been doing instead is digitizing a lot of family tree books. So these jiapu, we've scanned a lot of them and made them searchable so that now all you really need to be able to find these things and find this information, all you need is a Chinese name. And with one Chinese name, you can search the entire database. So how does that work exactly? Um, let's say, let's say I'm going to take another example. Let's say you don't know the name of your Chinese ancestor, who was called Sam Soon Wong. I'm taking another example now. Um, and by using the database, you come across a record, for example, a tombstone, which has Chinese information on it. Now, My China Roots has indexed the Chinese information, so you can always copy paste it and do what you like with it. But what we've also done is whenever there is a Chinese name on a record, we automatically search for it in our collections of Chinese ancestral books. So here at the bottom of this tombstone page, which is of a Sam Wong in Los Angeles, there is a link to view family tree records of this Sam Wong's Chinese name. So if I click on it, it will search for his Chinese name across all of our books, and we have many, many thousands of them, each containing thousands of names. And it has found two books in which this name appears. Now, this is all in Chinese, but I haven't needed to type any Chinese, right? I've only just clicked on a link from from the previous tombstone page. So there are two books that are from Hoisan. I think a few people in the chat said they had ancestry in Toisan. So these are two books for the Wong family of Hoisan. And if I click on one of them, examine matches, it will open the book on the page where the name has cropped up. So you can see that it is laid out in a family tree format. Even without reading Chinese, you can kind of make sense of this. And it's highlighted in yellow where the name is. So at this stage, I would probably need to identify the other names that are directly connected to this person and see if they correspond to my family tree. If the names all match, then I can be pretty sure that this is my book. Now you'll see that because most people who use this don't actually know how to read Chinese, we have this built-in dictionary so that when you click on a character, it shows you what it means. Um, the other cool thing about these books is if you see the top of this page, it has a series of numbers. These refer to the generation number of the people. So this Sam Wong, who I just found, he is of generation number 25. So this means that if it is my ancestor that is listed here, I have 24 generations to trace just in this one book, which is a lot in one go. And we have quite a few users who've done this, who've come across their jiapu and then just gone one by one generation at a time, making their way back through the book until they have the full lineage. And these books sometimes, let's see, 25 generations, that's about 500 years worth of history. But some books go even further back. They'll tell you, who the very first Wong or Feng or Li in your lineage was. Um, and that's the cool thing about Zupu. If I go back to the front of the book, um, you'll see that there's a lot of other kinds of content that you can learn about your heritage. Sometimes you'll find images of famous ancestors or local histories. Um, how did the clan, how did your family actually arrive in this place in the beginning? Um, where were they before, and what are the legends that have been passed down about the family and things like that? One other cool feature that I want to mention here is it's a brand new feature, which is a text extractor tool. So if you are in a Zupu and you want to copy some of the text that is on it, maybe you want to put it into Google Translate, we have this select for OCR button that lets you extract Chinese characters. So let me just see if it works now. I click OCR selection again, and it will process the characters and then extract them. So this looks pretty good, to be honest. The quality will, of course, depend on the type of image and the type of font that is used. But this then allows you to copy paste it and then put it into a document if it's a valuable paragraph that you're interested in. One of the features that we're working on now that we can rely on things like AI is automated extraction and translation so that you folks can simply read what is on the page without needing to do this work. But for now, you can selectively extract text. You can do this here. You could also even do this within a tombstone if you wanted to. Um, Yeah. I think the quality within a tombstone would be much lower because it's much grainier and harder um for OCR to be detected on this kind of font, which almost looks handwritten. But sometimes it works. I've had some success sometimes with extracting in this way. Okay, so I think, oh, sorry, one final thing that I want to show you before I wrap up is if you do happen to have Chinese characters already for an ancestor, you can simply search for it straight away through this interface. So here we have under the main menu, we've been looking at the all records search, but you could also simply go straight to the family tree books and then type in your name or your ancestor name, oops, in Chinese, whatever it may be. And then surname, you could type in your surname. It will automatically suggest Chinese surnames on all of our forms, even if you type them in English. And then search, and this will search all of our family tree books for a match. Okay, I think that is it. The final thing I want to mention then before we open the floor to questions is that so we've been asked quite a few times about text extraction. And what happens, for example, if you can't type in Chinese, but you have a photograph of a tombstone or a document that has a signature, and you want to extract the text? So we have a feature that's available, but not via the San Francisco Public Library account. So if you go to mychinaroots.com and register an individual account, this is different to the library account, then we offer a text extraction feature where you can upload your image and use the same tool that I showed you, but on your own image. Um, so with a personal account, this is a bit different to the library account. It also comes with family tree. So you can build your family tree and invite people to collaborate with you, and we will automatically send you matches based on what you put in your tree. Our system will just check whether there are matches between the database and your tree. So this is more of a um, an automated kind of VIP version of the library edition where you have to do all the searching yourself. Um, so that's if you're interested in registering a free account, the link is up here, mychinaroots.com/register. And in the meantime, I'll be happy to take questions.
Great. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Clotilde. Appreciate it. Richard, do you have some, I have some questions here that I've gathered, but Richard, do you have some that you want to,
Yeah. So
okay.
basically, I just want to go through there are a few questions, really good questions. So Nelson asks, how would I go about finding who was the sponsor of my father to the US?
Hmm,
Sponsor.
interesting. Yeah. So I sponsor would probably be listed on a case file. I mean, if um yeah, the sponsor could have been a relative or it could have been some kind of business connection. For example, if your father was being hired to work at a firm, often those things were very much would have overlapped, right? You were often hired by a distant relative. So my suggestion would be, yeah, to look for the immigration case file, which might have more background information. If anything, it would list the names of witnesses who had to be currently residing in the US legally, of course. Um, so often this would have been one of the sponsors would have been listed as a witness. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you. And then the second, Shirley has a question about her paternal grandfather was adopted, basically. Not sure if he was adopted by a paternal uncle. How does this affect the research? So
Excellent question. Yeah.
when someone is adopted, yeah.
Yeah. So you're right that it was quite common in the older days for adoption to happen within the clan. So, for example, if one brother had many children, or I should say, had many sons, but one of his brothers didn't have any sons, then the one without sons could adopt one of his brother's boys so that, all of the lines in the tree could continue. Um, so how does that affect the research? In terms of the research on the Chinese side, this is usually recorded in family tree books, actually. It will say they have a specific term for this type of adoption that happens within the family, and you'll be able to see it on the page. This depends, of course, on the book. Some books don't record everything, but when they do, it will tell you, he was originally this person's son. Unfortunately, in terms of how you would track this in, say, American records, it's really hard to say how you'd be able to trace that back, trace that adoption, because presumably after they immigrate, they would just state their parent as their adoptive parent. Um, so yeah, great question though. Mm.
Okay. And then Jack asks, basically saying that my great grandfather and great grandfathers who are from Hoysans and work in the salmon canneries in the Columbia River, but that's all I know. Do you have any research directions how Jack can pursue? So we're talking about
Mm,
Columbia River in the
I
salmon
don't
cannery.
actually know.
Yeah,
Where is that?
Columbia River. So
I don't know where
maybe
the
I
Columbia
can
River.
help. Yeah, let me help you
Um,
then.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I would guess my first advice would be look at the
Oregon.
censuses. Yeah,
It's in Oregon.
Oregon. Okay, okay. Uh, so the census is a great place to start because, of course, if you know that they were working in a specific area, um, at a specific point in time, then you should start with census records, and you'll be able to find pretty quickly whether or not they're in there. So as a reminder, censuses were taken every 10 years. There is an additional census that some people don't know much about, which was, I mean, it's quite horrible, really, but in the early 1900s, the authorities were getting continually annoyed at all of the Chinese labor that was still in the United States. And a few government officials got it in their head that they needed to check if these Chinese people had the right documentation. So they did their own Chinese special census. Of course, the goal was to kick as many out as possible, but they did carry out a census all over the United States. which included the name of every Chinese person, their status, whether they had a certificate of identity or not. And unfortunately, no one knows what happened to most of these census records. Only some states remain. The ones that we have been able to get our hands on are on the database, including, I think, Oregon and Idaho are on there. So if your ancestors were, part of, they were in Oregon in 1905, then they might be on there. So it's worth checking out. So that's what I would start with, the census collections, and then see what you can gather from there, names and dates, and then do basically what I did, right? You just search the different spellings, try different variations, try different dates, and see where you go. Good luck.
And I guess the last question would be, Jean has a question about women's, as you mentioned, women's who are not entered in a job pool. How do you do your research for a female in the family? Any suggestions?
Mm, yeah. So to qualify that, yes, you're right. Traditionally, women are not recorded in the Jiapu, although the Jiapu will say the maiden name of women that marry into a family. So if you're looking at a Wong family tree book, obviously all of the men in there, they're going to marry women from different surnames. So their surname will be in there. So if you do have a female ancestor you're interested in and you want to learn about where her family came from, often it was the case that people married within neighboring villages. So actually tracing the husband's ancestry might give you some clues or at least a radius where to search. But most likely you're going to need to research her brother or her father to be able to find, Chinese records. Um, I will say though that despite this tradition of not recording females' names, I have come across quite a few family tree books, both modern publications and early publications from the early 1900s, that will state not the full name of a woman or a wife, but they will say something like, oh, and Mr. Wong married Mrs. Lee, who was the daughter of this man from this village. So you can actually see in some Chinese records the origins of the women. You don't know their first name, sadly, but there are ways around it. And I will say that actually, sorry, this is a bit of a roundabout answer. I'm thinking about a lot of things as I'm talking. If you look at a lot of Chinese American tombstones, of course, you have the names in English and you have the names in Chinese. Well, sometimes the names in Chinese do have the first name of the woman, even though in English she's just called she, which of course just means maiden name, doesn't mean anything. So again, another reason to look for Chinese characters because they can hold more information than it seems.
I have a quick question about my grandmother married an American missionary in Hainan. And so I've heavily
Mm,
researched what I can get from the Protestant missionary records. But there were many children of American missionaries born in China. Would they be in your database because their place of birth was China? Or do you exclude people who aren't ethnically Chinese from the China Roots database? Because it's kind of hard to
mm,
find out what happened to some of these children. Some of them stayed. Most of them left after
mm.
World War II because the Japanese took over the island. But it's kind of a weird
Yeah.
hybrid situation.
It is, and that's a very interesting topic. So in general, we try to get for the census data sets, for
What I was
example,
thinking of
we
specifically.
try to filter those, yeah, by it's not perfect, but we try to get data sets that can be filtered by race. So if that is
Yeah.
actually, one of the fields by race. But in some cases, we have filtered by birthplace if race was not available. But mostly it will be for the censuses will be by race. In terms of Hainanese records, I don't think we actually have that many, I'm afraid.
Yeah. And
Um,
she was
but
Loy, wasn't Han. So she was considered Aboriginal on the island. So that's another disconnect
mm,
there. But Yeah, we have very little information about her family because of
Well,
that.
yeah, depending on how much information, how much time they spent in Hainan, this might be something to ask our researchers about and to
Mhm.
have a conversation with them to see what sort of historical records there might be at the Hainan Regional Archives or something like that.
And I do know her
Um,
village name, but most of the place names in Hainan changed after the revolution. And so it
oh,
looks
okay.
like you have
That's pretty good.
synonymies. So if I had the spelling, that was also kind of pinionized by the missionaries, but if I know what her village was called in the early 1900s, it's probably not called the same thing now, like Hoi Hao is Haiko and things like that. But it looks like from what you demonstrated, you have those synonymies regardless of the time period that would map those names. If I could get an almost right phonetic spelling from
Yeah,
that.
yeah, no, that's great that you know the
Because
village. I mean, if it is a village and not like a big town, because it can be a
it's,
bit hard to tell. You
now
might think it's
I'm
a
pretty
village, but
sure it
actually
was
it's
from what the missionaries wrote about going there. I think it was a village. They ran around on horses. There were no roads. They met
okay,
mostly
okay.
by
Well,
boats. So yeah,
yeah, I hope so too, but China has changed a lot in the last I mean, even just in the last 30 years, there were some parts of so this whole region called Bao'an, close to Hong Kong, not Hainan, but close to Hong Kong and now Shenzhen, 30 years ago was just kind of like salt fields and marshland. And now it's this huge, huge megalopolis around Shenzhen. So unfortunately, things do change very rapidly. And that's also why we're encouraging people to, if they want to visit their village and they want to make contact, to do so as soon as possible.
yeah,
Because a lot of these small hamlets in the countryside are both being emptied out and built over, especially if they're quite close to the bigger cities.
okay,
And
thank
Hainan,
you.
unfortunately, is one of those big tourist destinations
Yeah,
for
Sanya.
even
Yeah,
for
they love
mainland
that
China.
beach. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. It's really
Excuse,
fascinating research. I hope you find out more
Well, I'll
about
tell
their
you
stories.
the most disturbing thing was the first census record when my grandparents came over. They couldn't bring themselves to write the word wife in the column that should have read wife. They just put the word Chinese. So in a small town in Kansas, biracial marriage in 1920 was a bit shocking to all those involved, but I thought that was interesting that the census taker couldn't even write that down.
is
Wow.
there one that can assist or be hired to do some of the handiwork, the research?
Is there someone that can be hired? Yes, absolutely. Um, I can reshare the link in the chat. But essentially, My China Roots is made up of, there are different things that we do, right? We run the database, we try to upload as many records as possible, but we also have a full-time team of researchers based in Guangzhou who, this is their full-time job. They are available for hire by whoever needs help. And they spend their time traveling to ancestral villages on behalf of families, not just in the US, but all over the world, from Singapore, Malaysia, Jamaica, you name it. And they travel to these villages. They often speak not just Mandarin, but Cantonese and Khoisan. And they'll go to villages to take lots of pictures, to conduct interviews, to make photocopies of family tree books. And then they'll compile everything into a report for you, whoever wants this research done. So
Because I
definitely, I think if mm,
have no knowledge of my father's heritage. Um,
mhm.
from what I understand, he came over on a boat from Shanghai and decided to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about the legends of in the rumors, and that's about it. I have nothing of that. I do on his grave. There is some Chinese writing on there that I can't read. And
Mm-hmm.
then when I went to the cemetery, I found out that the grave was listed under another name, which I never knew that he had.
Wow.
Ah, That's very interesting. If the names sound completely different, as in if even the surname is completely different, then that makes me think either the grave was exhumed and he was buried on top of someone else, which could have happened, or he was using a paper name. That would
Uh,
be my
that,
reaction if the names are completely different.
yeah, that's what I suspect is that he had papers done when, by somebody. Where he got them from, the rumor was is that was my grandfather who was uh, my mother's grandfather, which was very big in Chinatown at the time. And I think the papers were arranged. That's my suspect.
Mm,
So
So
interesting. Well, if you,
Vincent, yeah, you can contact me and I'm happy to work with you. Are you in the Bay
mhm.
Area?
yes, well, I'm on the
Okay,
East Bay.
yeah, that's fine. Just call me up or email me. I'll happy to give you some direction how to find whatever. Yeah,
Okay, you were okay.
Richard.
You are you. What was
I'll
your name
email
again?
you. Richard,
Okay,
Richard Lee. I'll email you, Vincent. Yeah.
Great.
okay, great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And I did put the link again that I shared earlier, which was the Hire Us link that um, Clotilde shared with
Mhm.
myself for me to share with all of you. So that's in there a couple times in the chat. And there was one other or actually there's two more questions here that were directed specifically at me. One was from Bruce, and I don't know if you mentioned this, Clotilde, but are we able to download the GIAPU or other files from My China Roots? Are those available for download?
Unfortunately, not
Mm,
in their totality.
okay.
Um, you can, of course, download one image at a time, just
Hmm.
because some of them are really, really,
Yeah.
some of them are huge, some of them
Yeah.
are really hundreds, if not thousands of pages long, and also they are very valuable. So we don't allow people to download them.
Okay.
Um,
But you can
yeah,
download, but you would be able to download the individual pages or images of the individual pages, and you can
yes,
and you could I guess you could print the individual file,
individual images,
yeah,
yes, yeah,
images.
yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
So, yeah.
Okay, and then yeah, that was the oh, and you already answered the question about the staff of My China Roots being bilingual.
Hmm.
I would assume that they are, since they have to. I'm sure they're more than just bilingual. They're probably
Right. Yeah,
trilingual,
I
and
mean,
yeah, since there are so many
yeah,
languages. Yeah.
we're quite an international team, although of course the researchers are native Chinese. I mean, their English is perfectly, it's great. But all of the other folks who work for My China Roots, I'm the only one based in the UK, but we have Chrislyn, who's in the Bay. She also has Malaysian Chinese heritage. Our CEO, the guy who founded the company, he's actually Dutch, Indonesian, Chinese. So he grew up in Holland, but his family is Indonesian Chinese. Our product lead and CTO, he's American born Chinese, but grew up in like Virginia and Canada. So we're
Mm.
all very,
Mhm.
spread out, but can relate to the experience of being somewhat Chinese, if that makes sense. Um, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Clotilde. Uh, and yeah, really appreciate it. There are a couple